In the face of the coronavirus, public discussions of trendy social justice topics have largely disappeared. Talking points like toxic masculinity and climate alarmism, only recently presented as existential threats, have all but evaporated in the cold, harsh light of a tangible issue having an immediate and profound effect on our lives. However, there are still a few radical hangers-on who, possibly alarmed that their favourite causes are no longer in vogue, have hijacked the virus to weave identity politics back into the zeitgeist. The latest iteration comes from the UK in a viral video entitled "You Clap for Me Now." This is a reference to Clap for Carers, a weekly practice in which Britons publicly applaud NHS and other frontline workers to commemorate their efforts.
So, it's finally happened.
That thing you were afraid of.
Something's come from overseas.
And taken your jobs.
Made it unsafe to walk the streets.
Kept you trapped in your home.
A dirty disease.
Your proud nation gone.
But not me.
Or me.
Or me.
Or me.
No, you clap for me now.
You cheer as I toil.
Far from a message of tolerance, "You Clap for Me Now" is a smug, passive-aggressive dirge that perpetuates the tired old myth that Brits who have concerns about immigration are bigots. This is despite the fact that, according to the 2019 YouGov Cambridge Globalism Survey, the UK has one of the most pro-migration populaces of all its major European neighbours, especially when it comes to immigrants arriving with a job offer already in place. That's not to say that modern Britain is devoid of racism. Racism exists, and it should always be called out and condemned. But that's not what this video is doing. "You Clap for Me Now" only serves to splay the inherently divisive politics of identity onto a crisis that has nothing to do with it. It is projecting a confected anti-immigrant hostility onto British society at large, which, if we go by the numbers, is simply not there in any systemic capacity. Shame on those who would co-opt a global tragedy for their own ideological gratification. So, Michael, I always wonder, am I being a little bit too harsh here? Is there something to this video, or is this just identity politics for the sake of identity politics?
Well, I wasn't aware of it until you raised it, Daisy, I have to say. Maybe I'm not on social media enough these days. I've almost barred myself from it for sanity reason. But, look, I don't think there's much to it at all. I suspect there's just a small bunch of people here doing their little thing, and it might be important to them. I understand the point they're trying to raise, but I agree with you. I think it's raised off a false premise. And I think a lot of people that pretend that Australia, or Britain in this case, is some kind of cesspit of racism and a den of iniquity, are probably the people that have never left those countries. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you travel around the world, you will inevitably come across an element of racism or discrimination everywhere you go. There's no anti-racist utopia anywhere on the planet. And countries like Australia and Britain and the United States, for that matter, they got their bigots, sure. But overwhelmingly, the population are tolerant. And that's evidenced in not just the law, but it's also evidenced in the multiracial makeup of societies. I mean, go to Malaysia, for example. I mean, racism is entrenched in the constitution there, which obviously gives native Malays an inherent legal advantage in many respects over anyone who's not. Now, there's no thing like that here. So I think that this is really coming out of a lot of people that, at the end of the day, aren't very worldly, to be blunt.
Well,
don't you have to hand it to the left, though? Sorry, Daisy. Don't you have to hand it to the left that they never miss a trick to push their own barrow about identity politics or to further their cause? Now, most of them, you rightly point out, all these woke brigades have remained silent as their agenda has been implemented anyway. But I pick up on a point that Michael said about racism in societies, and particularly the UK. The greatest example we've seen of racism in the UK was when you had predatory men of Asian extraction, I think Pakistani mostly, that were preying on white women, white girls. There was a pedophile network. People complained to the police about it for years, and the police decided not to do anything for fear of being called racist. And that was exposed at the tragic cost of many girls' lives. Their innocence was taken away from them. They were abused and mistreated, and now those people are in jail. So, you know, there is racism at work, but it's not always flowing in the direction that the lefties would like us to think. What do you think about that, Sarah?
Well, I have to say that I thought this video was absolutely terrible, and I think it's a huge own goal because, as Daisy said, it's a nod to this clap for carers movement in the UK where frontline workers are applauded, and I think that's wonderful. I think all of us think that these are the unsung heroes of our society right now, and a lot of them are, you know, not particularly well paid and working in very thankless and often dangerous positions, and a lot of them are in the UK clearly come from ethnic minorities, and I'm sure a lot of them do encounter racism. So I think the clap for carers is great, and then this has just taken that, Daisy, as you said, and hijacked what should be a feel-good moment, a moment of unity, and thought, how can I turn this into something that makes people feel really guilty and bad about themselves? And I don't think it works because movements have to be a bit organic. And when we talk about, we've all heard the phrase, get woke, go broke, which refers to when corporates and brands, get too bogged down in this social justice messaging, and it doesn't fly with consumers. And that's really, I think, what's happening here. I feel really sorry for the people in the video because I'm sure most of them are really well-meaning, lovely people, and it's been put together by this hipster creative from an agency who, like I say, has decided to take a great moment and make something really nasty and try to make people feel guilty and feel bad about themselves. It's actually terribly executed. And if you look at that Gillette commercial last year, do you remember that one that sought to have a Me Too tone and talk about toxic masculinity? And that was completely ridiculed. I remember talking about it at the time. It was just a really badly executed ad. And I think this is a terrible video. And I think it's going to be a complete fizzer.